Hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Author's Pen. I'm Jason Hutchins, and today we're chatting with Douglas Wynne, author of The Devil of Echo Lake. His newest book is a thriller called Steel Breeze. It's a fantastic book, and we're going to delve into it here in a moment, but first I want to talk a little bit about Douglas and get to know him. Douglas, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back, Jason. My pleasure.
Yeah, we're glad to have you with us again. And for the folks that maybe didn't see the first interview that we did when we talked about The Devil of Echo Lake, do you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I grew up on Long Island and started playing in bands when I was young. I wrote a little bit of fiction when I was about 15. I was pretty gung-ho with writing short fiction. And then the guitar kind of came into my life and seduced me away from that. So the only writing I did for quite a few years was song lyrics, and played in a bunch of bands, went to Berklee College of Music, and I thought that I would stay with music. I studied production and engineering there, and ended up working at a recording studio, which eventually burned me out, and I ended up landing in my wife's hometown of Newburyport, Massachusetts, where I, without a band, found myself going back to fiction, and ultimately got serious about that by writing a horror novel about the music industry, which isn't hard to do if you've seen the inside of the music industry. And one thing led to another. That won a competition and was published, and since then I've been nose to the grindstone with keeping up writing.
Okay. Well, and in talking about your background and your interests, I was reading a little bit about your bio on your blog, monstersandmiracles.wordpress.com. You list yourself as a musician, a martial artist, a small business owner. And you talked a little bit about this just a second ago, but could you tell us a little bit more about how those career moves have influenced your writing, or how they affect the stories that you tell?
Sure. I think writing when I was younger, all I really had to work with for material was my influences, writers that I admired who were typically quite a bit older than me, who had some life experience under their belt. And as I've come back to writing now, later in life, there's material, of course, from jobs you've had, relationships you've had. I think if you succeed in writing early, maybe you end up writing about writers a lot. And in my second book here, Still Breeze, the main character is actually a novelist. But that book is more informed by things I picked up studying martial arts, just like the first book was largely informed by music, business experiences, playing in bands, working on the other side of the glass as an engineer. And so I think anytime a writer can show a view of a world that they can present as an insider's view that other people may not know about, if you don't get bogged down too much in the details, but use it to create a sense of realism, that can be a great jumping off point. And probably the negative side of writing about things drawn from life is that everyone thinks you're writing about them. And the way I describe that typically to people who know me is that fiction writing is a lot like dreaming. It starts out with this raw material from daily life, and as that gets put into the blender of your imagination, it inevitably springs off. It should spring off into more speculative directions. And in my case, that's more of a nightmare than a dream typically, because I'm writing horror thrillers.
Okay. Well, have there been any instances? You mentioned that sometimes people think you're writing about them. Have you had any run-ins with folks or issues along those lines where maybe someone thought that you were pulling too directly from their lives or something along those lines?
I'm careful not to just document people I know, but I think with family it's easiest for things, because those are the people that you know best and probably spend the most time with. So yeah, my wife is always giving me crap about having decapitated her in my second book, and I'm like, you've got to stop identifying with fictional characters. She's blonde for one thing. You're not. I try to make some distinctions, but sure, you probably a writer will identify with characters, certainly main characters, and so people start to wonder what else comes from direct experience. And I do try to camouflage that quite a bit and take pains to differentiate.
Okay, so there's no subtle message built in there for when she overcooks the meatloaf.
No.
Okay.
No, she's a vegetarian, so there's no danger
Oh,
there.
all right.
There will be no meatloaf.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about Steel Breeze? What's this book about?
Steel Breeze is a crime thriller about Desmond Carmichael, who is a single father, a single parent of a 4-year-old son because his wife was brutally murdered a year before the events of the book. And when we meet Desmond, he is struggling to provide a good life for his son on a single income now as a writer. And there are questions about his wife's murder. They put someone away for the crime who was caught with the weapon, but there are still some unanswered questions. And there's a local police detective who still harbors some suspicions that Desmond himself may have killed her. When we meet Desmond, he discovers that someone is stalking him and his 4-year-old son, and he starts to receive cryptic messages that have things in common with the nature of his wife's murder. So he starts to also wonder if the wrong person was put away. And the problem he faces now is he's not only trying to protect his son against the threat of a serial killer, but he's fighting a war on two fronts because the people in his life, his in-laws, and the local authorities start to question his fitness as a parent and his mental stability because they see him as this guy who's always imagining monsters as a fiction writer, and they think maybe he's unhinged now, maybe he's seeing shadows, or maybe he really was the killer. So there's a lot of suspense and tension, some twists and turns as he tries to solve this mystery, and ultimately finds himself up against a highly trained samurai serial killer.
Wow. Okay. You said the antagonist is I believe the killer is called the Katana Killer. Is that right?
Right. That comes up as one moniker for him. Yeah.
Okay. So what inspired that villain?
My own practice of martial arts, which I got into mostly just for getting some exercise in a way that wouldn't be boring as hell, standing on a treadmill. My wife first got into Taekwondo, and I tried it out and realized I liked it because of the mental focus that came along with the workout. Along the way, I realized that there was a lot more to be gained from it, and so after doing Taekwondo for a number of years, I started to get into Iaido, which is the Japanese samurai sword art, just because swords are cool, and I'm a geek who grew up on Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings, and swinging a sword is is a relaxing way to spend an hour. But I realized that in spite of what you see in samurai movies, Iaido is a sort of moving meditation. It's this very calming. Some people liken it to golf. That it's a lot harder than it looks, and there's a lot of beauty in the details, but it's a kind of meditative practice. However, when you're watching videos of guys who are experts at this, these senseis from Japan, and even watching my own teacher practice it, the fierceness in their eyes and just the cleanliness of their cuts, you really realize just how lethal these people would be if they meant to do harm with a sword. So the villain emerged out of watching martial artists and also thinking about what would be motives for someone killing with that method, what historically might figure into his motives, and what might be his mindset, because with this sort of Zen meditative aspect to a very lethal art, how might that change his level of perception? And I found that kind of fascinating to explore.
Okay. Well, Douglas, we need to take a quick break here, but we'll come back in just a moment. And folks, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back and talk more with Douglas Wynne about his newest book, Steel Breeze.
All right. I know this isn't any fun to talk about, but we should. Okay. So who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice.
And I'll try to get the generator going without any gas.
Oh, let's not forget the cell phones, which probably won't work.
Right.
And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
Well, I think we couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
I don't know what's happening. Start a new chat. What did I do? Okay, wow. It's so weird.
Hey! Hi!
Oh my gosh. Hi! God, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm so nervous. Gia, you're so big. Come closer to the camera. Wait, now you're in my face. That was so good.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today, I'm just an aluminum can, but one day, I could be a stadium.
Welcome back to the Author's Pen. I'm Jason Hutchins, and today we are talking with Douglas Wynne, author of Steel Breeze. We were just talking a little bit about the villain. Douglas, could you tell us about the importance of tension in the story and about the techniques that you use for crafting suspense?
Sure. I definitely went into this book with the prime directive being that it would be a high suspense, high tension kind of story. I wanted it to move at a fast pace. And it's sort of a cliche that in all writing, not just thrillers, people are captivated, readers are captivated largely by conflict, by tension, and that even in a romance, in any genre, every bit of dialogue, every scene can have an element of tension and people with either a misunderstanding of each other or opposing views on something, no matter how trivial it is. I think that's what keeps people turning pages. And so I had that very much in mind, and I think the premise of the book really puts my character in a place where he is facing conflict on all sides. But another thing that I have realized sort of in retrospect about my approach to novels anyway, because I think I've done this to some extent in both books so far and didn't realize it while I was doing it, is that as I'm moving toward the midpoint or maybe the three-quarter point in a story, it's as if I can kind of visualize this as there's sort of like a mirror placed on the timeline at around maybe the three-quarter point. And so at the beginning of the story, I don't want to bog the reader down in a whole lot about backstory. These stories of mine start in the midst of things. There's already been things in the past that people are regretting and that the consequences are starting to catch up with them on. So as we approach that mirror, things that have happened in the past come more into focus, and the characters themselves come more into focus as we get closer to it. And so without slowing down the story by telling you things that have happened already, I can tell you about what's happening now and gradually bring the past more into focus. When we get to that mirror, we find that it's really a window, and the character can then pass through it, and by revealing some big things about the past toward the climax of the book, I feel that then there's more of an accelerated momentum as we see. Now that we know what this means, what's he going to do about it, and what will the ultimate consequences be? So I find that that's, for me anyway, one way of approaching suspense, and I probably can't get formulaic. I'll have to find other ways, but that seems to work for me so far.
Okay, so you had that timeline sort of built as a device to reveal important points of the story at specific points. Was that something that you planned from the beginning, or did that evolve through the writing process?
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of something that I noticed after finishing the second book. I realized that there was a kind of big reveal about the villain at a pretty late chapter, and so he was a fairly mysterious character. And of course, as soon as I noticed that, I realized, well, I did that in The Devil of Echo Lake also. Right around that sort of chapter placement, we learned some key things about the villain that change things and lead to the end game. So no, not conscious at all, really. Just sort of, I don't know, something that I was instinctively doing that I think helps the structure of this kind of story.
Okay, so now that you've done this for 2 different books, do you have ideas for how that process might shape whatever's going to come next from you?
I figure I have to try something else. So the book I'm working on now, it's hard to say. It's in an early enough stage that I don't really know how it'll shake out. But because I don't like to outline a lot, I do like to discover things about my characters as I'm writing them. But I already have been a lot more forthcoming about my antagonists early on in the 3rd book. So we'll see what that necessitates as it goes.
Okay. Can you tell us about some crime and suspense authors that influenced Steel Breeze?
Sure. I kind of made a conscious effort to delve into the genre before writing in it. I've read a lot of horror in the past, and there are elements of books by my influences, such as Stephen King or Peter Straub, that deal with mystery and crime. But I wanted to read the best, so I was definitely impressed by Harlan Coben, Dennis Lehane, Peter Abrams. Were all suspense readers, suspense writers, and crime fiction authors who had an impact on me. I kind of deconstructed a Harlan Coben novel to try to decode its DNA and look at how chapters began and how they ended. And even though I wasn't plotting and planning a lot of my own book, I think those guys gave me a big influence in terms of pacing and the progressive revelation of information. This isn't really a murder mystery, but suspense, I think, has a lot to do with carefully doling out information. So they were a big influence, those guys.
Okay. Well, what was your research like for writing this book? What did you have to do? What was the process? How did you go through it?
The martial arts stuff was already kind of in hand because I'd been practicing and reading about Iaido and about samurai swords. It's set in a suburban town in America, not unlike the one I live in, New England town. So I was looking at familiar settings to inform it. I did some research on forensics. There was actually a great talk at our local library by a forensics expert that was somewhat filled in some details for me. But probably the biggest area of research was looking into some aspects of World War II that play into the story. And I don't want to give away too much of that, but aspects of the internment camps, the Japanese-American internment camps out west. I for a while was filling my desktop on my computer with Ansel Adams' black and white photos of the Manzanar internment camp, which is some stark and haunting imagery. So a lot of reading in that area also helped me to flesh out my backstory. Okay.
And what did you come up with why the title, Steel Breeze?
I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. And so Shine On You Crazy Diamond has that refrain about a steel breeze, which just sounds nice to me, but those lyrics don't really have much else to do with my story. So where it does tie in specifically for me is when you're practicing samurai sword art, the groove that runs down the blade of the sword makes a sound when it moves through the air. And if you're cutting at a good angle, you'll hear a nice loud sound. It's called a tachikaze, a sword wind sound. So so that's something that plays into the story, and so there's the meaning of the title there.
Okay. During the editing process, could you talk about any arcs or ideas that you started with but maybe shifted away from in later drafts?
Sure. Again, I don't want to spoil much about the plot, but the story didn't change very much between the first draft and later drafts, even though I did maybe 5 drafts total. A lot of that was polishing and making things more economical. But there was one place where I realized that the killer has an apprentice. I'll give away that much. And some of my early readers were giving me feedback that made me realize that I needed the apprentice to kind of be the pivot, the hinge on which the story hangs to some extent. And by making him less invested in, less far gone down the path of no return toward evil action, I could play with the psychology of that more. I could have more suspense invested in that character. So I ended up changing some of the murders to another character in a later draft, which is, I think, the biggest change.
Okay. Well, Douglas, we're going to take another quick break here, but we'll be back in just a couple of moments. Stay tuned. We're talking with Douglas Wynne, author of Steel Breeze.
It's getting late, real late, and you have a lot of work to do. Your assignments are due in the morning, but you'll wait till the last day to do it. Instead of doing your work, you'll head for a party and forget all about your assignments. It's now 5:30 in the morning, and would you have time to finish your assignments after you partied so hard? I don't think so. Don't be a procrastinator. Do your homework.
WNCP Radio The Hawk is the place to go to hear about what's going on campus and for the hottest new music and the best shows. Listening online is super easy. All you have to do is go to uncp.edu, find WNCP Radio at the bottom of the scroll down menu, and click on the live link. With new shows every week, it's always a good time to listen. While you're listening, you should like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter to always know what's happening with WNCP Radio The Hawk.
Welcome back to the Author's Pen. I'm Jason Hutchins, and we're here today with Douglas Wynne, author of Steel Breeze. Douglas, we've been talking about your book. Could you tell the audience what you think is the most important in making a thriller successful?
Successful as a story or commercially successful?
Well, let's start with it as a story, and then you can take us through commercial as well.
Maybe it's the same answer. Making sure that the story is an edge of the seat ride, that it's going to keep people from putting it down, that there's never a place where people feel that they're losing interest. I think that's any writer's goal, but certainly in a thriller that's paramount. I'd like to believe that if you can do that, then the marketing will hopefully kind of take care of itself by word of mouth. I still believe that people talking about books that excite them in any forum, whether it's face-to-face or on the internet, is the key to success. But I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm hoping that talking to you is part of making the thriller a success, that all these interviews and things that we do with social media will play a role.
Okay. Well, in the process of writing, obviously, for it to be successful, you have to be satisfied with it. So, and as writers do, they go through a number of drafts. How do you know when you've finished it and you're ready to put it forward, like when you're satisfied with it?
I'd probably tweak with it, tinker with it for as long as anybody let me. So it's good to have deadlines now. But getting feedback from friends who I trust, who have read other things for me, I go to them for specific. I'll choose people for specific reasons, that they share a certain taste that I have in fiction, or that they're good at catching certain kinds of things. So if I'm getting a consensus from that group that it's working, then it's mostly just a matter of me feeling that the language is as refined as I can get it. So yeah, it's just sort of an instinctive sense that if I keep messing with this, it's probably going to get worse, not better. So okay. A little vague, but there you go.
How many drafts do you think you went through for Steel Breeze?
This one I think was about 5, and then after 5 before submitting it, and then my editor comes back with feedback, and so there's an additional draft and a half or something. A proofreader comes back, but by then it's mostly down to details. Once
you get it completed, there's a marketing process for books like this. Can you talk to us about that? What's that process like, and how involved are you in marketing a book like this?
Very, very involved, because I think these days any author has to be. No one is probably better qualified to express, a passion for a story than the person who wrote it. But being with a small press, as I am, some of the things that we do, since we're not putting a lot of money into, big ads, big expensive ads, billboards, TV spots, it's not feasible. But Goodreads and library thing, as social networks focused on readers in particular, those have been enormously helpful for me to find readers. We do giveaways on Goodreads, and those reviews and the social nature of them really have helped me to find people who are now going back and reading my first book because they discovered Steel Breeze. That's I think a real important part of it for writers these days.
So having 2 books under your belt at this point, in terms of readership, are you finding, do you have numbers back on sales? Is this one doing better as a result of already having some exposure from having written The Devil of Echo Lake?
I think maybe they're doing about as well as each. Maybe Steel Breeze is doing about as well as Echo Lake was at the same time last year. We put out Steel Breeze 9 months later, so I think there's a little bit of momentum in that. But what it has been nice is to see the interest in the first book to people who didn't know about it and found out about it through the second.
So not even a year later, you're already releasing your second novel. Was there overlap in the writing of these, or was this just a matter of you got your book deal for the first one and you had to sit down and crank the second one out? How did that work?
Fortunately, when the first one won a fiction contest with this small press, Journal Stone, my publisher, I had been editing and refining and shopping around Echo Lake for a while doing that, to get my mind off of the rejections and the process and everything that you've got invested in trying to sell a first book. I wrote Steel Breeze mostly just to show myself that I had a second book in me, and to get my head out of just caring about the first one, so that it wouldn't matter as much that I'd have something else in the pipeline. So when they did sign me up for 3 books, I felt a little more confidence agreeing to that, because I knew I had at least a rough draft of Steel Breeze ready to go, and I was able to take the time to refine that.
Okay, well, Douglas, we're about out of time today, so I do want to thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
Yeah, well, Douglas Wynne's newest book is titled Steel Breeze, and it's available online right now. You can learn more about Douglas on his blog, monstersandmiracles.wordpress.com. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, happy reading.